Well, hello everyone, and welcome to PK7 Real World, where we talk about the 7 promises of a promise keeper and how we can put those into action in our lives into the real world. And I'm really excited today to welcome my guest, Jeremy Hatley, who's a minister. I'm going to let him tell you what kind of ministry that he has. So if you would, Jeremy, before we dive into the promises of a promise keeper, tell us a little bit about yourself. Were you raised in a Christian home and your family and that sort of thing?
Sure, yeah. Well, Keith, thank you so much for asking me to be here with you this evening. I'm really excited to be here. As Keith said, my name is Jeremy Hatley. My wife, Sarah, and I currently live in Yukon, Oklahoma. I'm originally from Amarillo, Texas. We've been married 8 years. We don't have any children. We do have a little dog. She's a miniature Schnauzer Shih Tzu mix. Her name is Topsy. And I have the incredible blessing of working as a hospice chaplain. And so I work for Mercy Hospital System, which is a health system here in the Oklahoma City area. And we serve an area of around 50 miles geographically centered on our offices. And so we have patients who live in their homes, who might be in the hospital, who might be in some kind of a care facility in Oklahoma City, all the way north to Guthrie, west to El Reno, east to, I'm not exactly sure how far east we go, but south, to Norman. And so we cover kind of a decent sized area, particularly for those of you who are familiar with the Oklahoma City metro area. And we have on average around 90 patients at a time. Sometimes it's up around 100, sometimes it's a little bit less than that, but on any given day, we have about 90 patients who are in our caseload. And as a chaplain, one of the things I get to do is I kind of work with our nurses and work with our social workers to make sure that we're providing for whatever needs our patients and their families have. So I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit more. But I did grow up in a Christian home. I'm very fortunate. Both of my parents are born-again Christians. I grew up in the United Methodist Church. And in fact, my maternal grandfather was an ordained pastor in the United Methodist Church. So we were always really involved in church. My parents, my dad and my mother both served on committees in the church, and my mom has sung in the choir for my entire life. And my sister and I were involved in children's choirs and then the youth program and everything like that. So I've been very fortunate that I was able to grow up in the church. Now, as working as a chaplain, I am an ordained minister, and I'm ordained in the Wesleyan Church, which is similar to the Methodist Church. But when I went to seminary in Michigan, which that's a whole nother story, I ended up becoming a part of the Wesleyan Church, and so that's where I ended up getting my ordination and where I hold my credentials. So that might be kind of a good introduction to start with.
That's a good start.
All right.
I'm sure most of my audience at least has heard of hospice care and has some idea of what it's about. But if you would, tell our audience the difference between hospice care and hospital care.
Yeah, no, that's a great distinction. So hospice, as you may or may not know, is a Medicare benefit. So if we have, once you're over the age of 65 in the United States, if you're on the federal retired person insurance program, which is called Medicare, hospice is a benefit that's available to you as a Medicare recipient. And Medicare defines hospice as the last 6 months of life. So now that doesn't mean, that obviously we don't know when a person is going to die, but if we can determine, based upon disease processes that a person is going through or a declining health overall, certain statistical information, certain diagnostic criteria, if we can determine that it's more than likely that they have less than 6 months left to live, then they qualify to go under hospice care. Okay. So in hospice, we turn our attention from, in the hospital, the focus is on curative treatment. So we're trying to heal whatever disease, whatever wound, whatever malady a person is dealing with in the hospital. In hospice, we recognize that curative measures may not be available. And so we focus on quality of life rather than quantity of life. So our hope and our desire is to make sure that our patient is as comfortable and as able to achieve the things that they want to achieve with whatever amount of time that they have remaining in their life.
Wow, what a tremendous ministry. I'm curious because you talked about going to seminary in Michigan,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I went to seminary though a lot earlier, a lot longer ago than you did. To be real honest, I don't remember any courses particularly related to hospice care. I remember one semester on a course on emergency support. You know, you get the call in the middle of the night and somebody's been in a car wreck, and how do you minister to the family? We had a course on that sort of thing. So did they cover this kind of care in seminary? And if so, how did they prepare you for that kind of work?
That's a great question. So my experience was much like yours in seminary. My seminary career was fantastic. You know, I got so much more in depth into the Word of God, and so much more able to process that and then be able to share that with other people. And so I cannot be thankful enough for my professors and for all the learning I endured at seminary. But it didn't really prepare me for the work that I do as a chaplain. I had to wait until after I got out of seminary to do that. And if you go into professional chaplaincy, very often you'll hear people talk about something that we call CPE. Now, CPE stands for Clinical Pastoral Education.
Okay.
So it's basically a kind of residency that you apply for after your seminary degree that prepares you for working in the specialized ministry of ministering to people in the healthcare setting, in the prison setting, in the military setting. Well, actually, I should say the U.S. military services do their own CPE training, but in hospitals, hospices, and prisons, and institutional work and that kind of thing.
All right.
So it was really, excuse me, it was really my training in CPE that prepared me for the work of being a chaplain. So I entered CPE as a team with 3 other residents. There were 4 of us, and we worked alongside 2 staff chaplains and then our CPE supervisor in a hospital. And we were responsible for providing all the day-to-day care for our patients. And we would come back to the group and talk about the discussions that we had with the patients. And our peers and our supervisor were interested in helping us find out, when you had this conversation and you said this to the patient, why did you say that? What were you feeling when you encountered this situation? It's all about designing so that we become more aware of ourselves, how we respond to people, and how we feel in certain situations, so that once we recognize those things, we can get out of the way and allow ourselves to be more open to let other people have the floor and let them be the focus of attention rather than ourselves.
That is, as I said earlier, that is such a tremendous ministry. Okay, to remind our audience, the 5th promise of a promise keeper is a promise keeper understands that Jesus calls him to be the hands and feet, serving others with integrity. He purposely lifts up the leadership of the church and his nation in prayer. And as you and I were talking before we started recording, the church obviously refers to the body of Christ. And you're one of the leaders in the body of Christ to your patients. You're the hands and feet of Jesus, really, during their most vulnerable time of life.
Absolutely.
Can you help us maybe understand what would be different about ministering to, first we'll start with Christians that are in hospice care, as opposed, say, to a Christian in a traditional church environment who may be undergoing some stress in life, but not within the last 6 months?
Sure. Yeah, that's so I would say, particularly once people either get a terminal diagnosis or they make the decision to go on hospice, suddenly they are face to face with their own mortality. You know, we all know that we're going to die at some point in our lives, but when there's that diagnosis, or when you make that decision to go from seeking treatment to going to hospice, you recognize that that now there's a very finite window of time that you have left on this earth. And even for Christians, people who have lived in the faith for decades and walk with Jesus every day and spend time in their Bible and spend time in prayer, that realization can kind of put a microscopic focus on unsettled events in our life, whether that's broken relationships with parents, broken relationships with children. Maybe it's guilt that you feel for something that happened decades ago, or mistakes that you made, or often people will begin to question, am I really forgiven? Like, I know what that means. I've studied that all my life, but really now I need to know, what does it mean to be forgiven?
Yeah.
And so if I'm working with a Christian patient, a lot of times that's where our conversations go. We may talk about, things that happened years and years ago in their life that they've never shared with their spouse, that they've never shared with their children, things that they just need to get off their chest and need someone to hear their story. That happens all the time. And sometimes it is people worrying about forgiveness or really questioning, when I die, what's going to happen to me when I go on to the other side? Now, of course, I don't have answers to a lot of these questions,
Sure.
but giving them the space to talk about it and share with it, and hear someone else, me, saying, yeah, I agree. That's a scary place to be in, and I don't know the answer for you, but we can kind of walk through this journey together.
Yeah.
I'm amazed at how much comfort and how much peace the Holy Spirit brings, not only into my life through those conversations, but seems to bring into patients' lives as well. Just having someone who's not trying to answer a question, but is willing to just kind of hold the tension of that question in a safe space.
Wow. I remember it's been about 3 years ago, I faced a really, what could have been a tragic health crisis.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember the thought, I was not at all worried or afraid or concerned about ending up in heaven.
Mm-hmm.
But facing the journey there is scary.
Yeah.
I had never faced it in that way, and that's a little scary.
Absolutely. Yeah. I've had conversations with a lot of people who they're not, like you just said, they're not scared of where they're going. They're not scared of getting to heaven, but it's that journey that none of us have ever been down before, that none of us really know how to describe or what to expect, because you only go down that journey once, so
That's
yeah.
right.
Yeah.
A little over 30 years ago, when I committed to the ministry, my first ministry in the church is I ministered into nursing homes.
Mm-hmm.
And I've often said from the pulpit, I've never heard an old person say, I should have spent more time at the office.
That's a mouthful. Yeah.
You kind of touched on this earlier, but as a minister, how do you
Mm-hmm.
help someone, and maybe talk about Christians and non-Christians now, who
Mm-hmm.
may be dealing with a lifetime of regrets and wouldas and couldas, that sort of thing?
Yeah. And I would say, I don't even think there's so much distinction between the way I would handle that situation with a Christian and with a non-Christian. A lot of times it's just giving them the space, like I said, again, to kind of talk things out, to talk about what is it they regret, what it is that they wish they'd done. But then trying to get them to talk about, or getting them to think about the good things that they've done. Hope, and no matter who they are, they've done good things, or the things that they're proud of. I can't tell you the number of times that I have someone who's they're just really sad, they're just really concerned. But if I can get them to talk about their grandchildren and what they enjoy doing with, or their children, what they enjoy doing with them, what they have shared with them, what they've taught them, that the children and grandchildren are now doing for themselves, that seems to give them some peace. That's a part of them that they have shared with someone else, that they can be proud of, that they can take joy in. And so a lot of times, obviously, I can't undo any mistakes that they've made. I can't give them forgiveness myself. But if I can help them to see that they have done good in their life, and that it's not too late for them to make amends with someone, or to do something good with the time that they have left, that goes a long way.
Wow, what a great ministry! As I've always said, I really admire uh, the challenges. Again, before we started recording, we did, for our audience, talk a little bit about that can be an exhausting work.
Yeah.
You don't, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you don't get to see that miracle very often,
Yeah.
if ever.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know where the journey is going to end. And so how do you take care of yourself and your wife when you deal with that kind of thing?
And I'll tell you, Keith, that's a constant struggle for me to balance giving myself away and then holding myself back, or not holding myself back, but taking care of myself. Sure. You know, I struggle with what is the balance, but I find it's important to really listen to my body and listen to my thoughts. And so if I spend, you know, I went earlier this week and I spent a couple of hours with the family, and I got back to the office afterwards, and I just didn't have the energy. You know, I had paperwork I needed to do. I had stuff like that, but I just didn't have the energy to do it. And it's giving myself the grace to say, the paperwork's going to be there. It's okay. And, you know, just taking some time. Maybe I leave early that afternoon and I come and spend time with my wife and my dog, or making sure that I get enough sleep is really important. So in the last few years as I've worked as a chaplain, I have found out that if I don't get 8 hours of sleep at night, I'm going to be in trouble the next day. So that getting a full 8 hours of sleep every night. And you know, for some people they can do well with 6 or 7. For me, it's got to be just about 8 hours exactly, or I'm not going to be happy. So really a lot of that is it's listening to my body, listening to how I'm feeling. If I find, you know, if I'm in a meeting with someone or I'm having a conversation with someone and they'll tell me about something that they've experienced in their day, if in my head my first thought is something like, well, I don't care, why are you telling me this story? Now, I'm not saying that out loud, but if I recognize that that's my first thought, that's a warning to me. Like, whoa, if that's what you're feeling in this moment, something's out of whack. You know, you're not in tune, you're not in balance, you're probably tired, you need to stop and take a check. And so especially if I notice a pattern of those, I've learned to say, okay, I've got to do something here, or I'm going to get burned out, I'm going to get hurt, or worse than that, I'm going to hurt somebody else in a hurry. So
what a great word. I hope our audience is listening. I have actually had those thoughts in terms I need to do something, you know, in personal relationships, when your wife or a coworker or something says something and I have those thoughts, you know, I don't care. Then I need to back off. I need to get some rest, or, you know, do something. What are some of the big challenges you have in ministering to the families of your patients?
I think probably the most common challenge that I face with our families is when they're not on the same page, either with one another or with the patient. So it could be, and it more often than not is the case, that the patient is ready to die. The patient has lived a good life. They just want to be comfortable, and they're just ready to move on to heaven, you know, or move on to the next thing in their life. And for so many children or grandchildren or siblings, it's not easy to let go of someone. You know, I tell families all the time, you know, even if your loved one has been sick for a long time, you may be anticipating their death, but you're never ready for it, you know. But often I run into families who they don't understand, you know, why is mom giving up? Why isn't mom fighting anymore? Why isn't, you know, why is dad's surrendering? Dad's giving up, you know. So it's a lot of times it's navigating these conversations with families on trying to get them all on the same page, so that whatever time they have left can be a time where they can come together and they can connect with one another.
As a pastor, I experienced some of that in trying to help families, particularly when their loved one has buried a spouse, you know, and after 50, 60, 70 years of marriage. You know, they're terribly lonely, and I understand that. What would be maybe your message to the younger men in our audience who right now are not thinking about that last year of life, but maybe should be? what kinds of things or advice could you give to them?
So I would say probably the best piece of advice I can give to anyone really is to keep in touch with the people that you care about.
Mhm.
Even if even if it's a difficult relationship, maybe you have that brother or sister or cousin or I don't know, someone in your life that you were close to and you had a falling out, you had an argument or you I don't know what the situation is, but someone that you had a falling out with, but someone that you still really care deeply about and you love and you would hate to lose them. Keep in regular contact with those people. Even, I mean, obviously you can only do your half of the bargain, so make a phone call or send a card or write an email or something like that. But keeping the people that we care about, we need to be quick to say I'm sorry, and we need to be constantly in communication with them, because truthfully none of us is guaranteed tomorrow. So even though we may be healthy today, who knows what could happen to us. And so I talk to so many people who've lost the chance to reconnect with a loved one that they ended on bad terms with, or they forgave a long time ago, but they never got the chance to tell them. Or so, our lives are too short. So,
Yeah.
like I say, be quick to forgive, be quick to say I'm sorry, and take the courage and take the strength to reach out.
Yeah. Oh, that's powerful. And
Mhm.
and I think you may have just answered part of my last question. If there was
Mhm.
just one message that you could give, particularly to the men of the church, the promise
Mhm.
keepers of the church, about honoring God in serving the elderly, what would that
Mm.
message be?
It's simple. Listen.
Yeah.
Listen to their stories. There was a song that came out when I was in high school, and it was a very strange song, but I remember there was a part in it that talked about be careful whose advice you take, but be patient with those who give advice. Advice is a form of nostalgia. Dispensing it is a way of pulling the past from the trash bin, painting over the ugly parts, and recycling it for more than it's worth. So when our elderly people, when our dying people, when our elders share stories, when they want to talk to you, just be there to listen. Just be there to share a conversation with them. That's
Yeah.
for some of them who've lost the ability to do things manually and things like that. All they have are their stories, and they have such wonderful stories to tell. I have heard the most amazing stories, and I feel so blessed to have been able to spend that time with those people, and they are so grateful to get to have someone listen to their stories.
Yeah.
So listen.
Oh, that is so good. Well,
Mhm.
Jeremy, I appreciate you being with us. I appreciate your words. I think our audience will appreciate it as well. And to my
Well,
promise
thank you,
keepers,
Keith.
yeah, let me remind you, being a promise keeper is not something we do on Sunday. It's not just theology. It's a real world way of life. Thank you.